welcome back to the second episode of MLP Vector Review. I am Sir Certix. Here in the studio with me are Yanoda, Mahauer, and new this week, Anbolinas. Say hola, Anbo.
Hi there, pura vida.
As you may have deduced from his accent, Anbo hails from Costa Rica, where everyone is relaxed. Costa Ricans are so relaxed, they don't even have an army. The more you know. I'd like to thank everyone who listened to our first episode and gave us their thoughts and asked questions. We didn't get any new vectors critique though, which is a bit of a problem, because we're using the last one we have stored up today. So, if you have a vector you want some critique on, put a link to it in the episode journal, and we'll take a look. Anyway, I'm out of things to say, so let's go on to the news. Mahauer?
Alright, this week it's more updates on the big collab we're doing, and if you're involved in that, especially in the background or something, and you have any questions, I would pay attention here. But basically, there was a better quality version released, and we're gonna kind of deter people from using that one, because it looks almost like it's like an earlier version of the final release, and we already have people working on what the final release was, but it's still a good reference for quality. If you like the poor quality, the other one is causing you issues, you can always use the alpha. But the people working on the background and the positioning, we're all going to use the Nova and Pixel Kitties uploads, because they're the final released version, and we don't want any confusion.
So it's all right to maybe color drop from the one that Seth released on Equestria Daily, but to get the actual to trace over, use Noval's version.
In fact, it's not really a good idea to pull the colors straight from the Pixel Kitties and the Nova one, because they're a little darker than they should be because they're scans, but it's alright because colors are mostly going to be taken from color guides and other sources, because the colors are a bit off on the scans, and the older one, they're a little better on the older version, that not the final release.
Okay, so I'll start with the featured artist of the week, and this week's featured artist is Midwest Brony, and the reason why we chose him as featured artist is his two vectors called "Do You Really Think They'll Like Me?" and "Blarity." The first vector art, "Do You Really Think They'll Like Me?" is entirely made out of the gradient mesh.
Well, I wouldn't say entirely made. I mean, the background crystals aren't, but most of the pony.
Oh yeah. Well, the character is entirely made of the gradient mesh tool from Adobe Illustrator, and it gives a very 3D feel of the character, as if it's standing out. And I specifically like the way he used the mesh tool. I never even considered using or making this type of vector art. Is there anything else I should add?
Yeah, for those of you interested in shading, and if you have Illustrator, the gradient mesh is a really nice tool for shading and making things look more realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Don't forget about Blarity too, though.
Oh yes, Blarity. Now is Blarity, which is now entirely or almost entirely made out of the blend function of Adobe Illustrator. Can you emphasize how it was exactly made, sir?
The blend tool basically is what it does is you have two shapes, two paths, and you select both of them and make a blend. And what the blend tool is, it creates new paths between those paths, which are it blends between them. So if you created a circle and a square and you used blend on them and it had just one step, right in the middle you'd have something that was somewhere between a circle and a square. And if you had different colors, it would have the color that was between them. So with blends you can create complex gradients that aren't linear or aren't radial, but are different shapes. It's one of the good ways to do magic, because you can blend a complex magic shape between transparent and non-transparent. Now what he's done here with this one is he has created, like for example, if we look down at the back hoof here, he's created the line on one side of the hoof and the line on the other, and set it to blend with sufficient space between the steps so you can see them, so it's not just a direct blend through, and that creates all the little lines between them. And now you won't get it to look quite as nice if you just use the blend tool, because there'll be a lot of extraneous things. So what he's done is he's blended them together and then gone through and deleted a lot of the other stuff to make it look this nice.
Another thing I wanted to point out is it took a lot of pre-planning, and like you could tell he really had a vision of what he wanted in his mind, because you have to realize that he's creating more complex shapes here using just lines. Like just her face, you can tell that it's her face because of the way the lines actually move through it, and the same goes with the arms and the tail. But it took a lot of pre-planning, and he also had to go through, and there's a lot of overlapping of the lines that he had to go through and manually delete, so it must have taken up like quite a while, and I compliment him for that.
Good art always takes a long time, longer than you think.
Yes, indeed.
And we can tell that Midwest Brony has obviously put a lot of effort into what he does.
Another art that I also found interesting from Midwest Brony just recently is his vinyl scratch vector. Did I pronounce that right?
Vinyl.
Vinyl scratch.
Vinyl. Okay, vinyl scratch vector. And here you also used mostly gradient meshes, but this time with color variations and in a very messy style, which is, I find, actually quite interesting.
Yeah, this is traced off an original picture by Jake Lyon, or his deviant art is Doc Wario. And I mean, the original one is quite messy looking, as it's kind of an art style, which is kind of hard to recreate in vector format, but I think Midwest Brony has done a really interesting job on it.
Yeah, it's something I wouldn't have even attempted to do. I would have saw this and like, that looks pretty cool, but I would never even make an attempt to vector it, and he really pulled it off pretty good.
Alright, time to move on to the critique.
Wait, who's leading this? I vote sir. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Well, that was an enthusiastic response.
Well, nobody opposed, so start us off. Oh god.
Alright, here we have a vector of Derpy from the last roundup. This is done by Timmy-Fooba before he became a vector inspector. Now, I'd like to say that this is a good pose. Yeah, when selecting something to vector, it's very important to select a good pose. And I think he got a good one here. To quote Joey Darkmeat's comment on this vector, "Frick me, this is cute even for Derpy."
I can't argue with that.
Me neither.
More on what he did good. He really, for an early vector, one of the most important things is to keep a steady line width throughout, and he did a really good job on that.
Yeah.
Like, there's only one area, but we'll get to that later, but, like, the mane he did good, the ear looks pretty good, the wings are good, most of the body strokes are good. Just very few errors throughout, but, like, for the most part, did a pretty good job.
Well, I also like to add that it was also made in Photoshop, so that's another plus, that the strokes are very consistent, which usually is very difficult in Photoshop to have consistent strokes.
Alright, so the first errors we're going to point out here are the ends of a lot of the strokes here don't end in points, like the ends of the wings and the ends down on some of the legs. Now, some of these strokes taper, but not all of them do, and pretty much any point that ends inside the shape should come to a nice sharp point.
Yeah, we've definitely been pushing for mostly tapered ends more recently, but in the past, like, as long as you stay consistent throughout and around every single point, because It used to be easier for a lot of the techniques people did. And, like, you could make it look nice. It was a lot harder, in my opinion, though. But it's technically more accurate to go with the tapers throughout, but definitely make sure it's the same everywhere. Like, you can't have half tapered, half rounded. Like, you just, you gotta stay consistent.
Yeah, on the nostril, one side comes to what looks like a point, on the other side is a little more rounded, so those should be the same.
So next we start on the stroke width.
Did we have anything to say about the stroke width?
Well, only the tail, really, because it was really the only part that got a little bit wobbly.
Yeah.
But even so, for a Photoshop vector, not too bad. Like, one wonky area is pretty good.
And I also like to add that on the nose or muzzle area, there's also a slight stroke width difference, but it's quite minor.
The nose is somewhat wider than the rest of the strokes.
Yeah.
Doesn't keep it shaped too well on both sides, but like it's pretty good. Like, it can use a little bit of improvement, but it's not horrible.
The next I would like to point out is the lack of the ellipses in the eyes. I noticed that the eyes aren't very smooth or rounded, and I just recommend using the ellipse tool to get a smoother circle or ellipse. But generally, he got pretty close in getting it almost perfect ellipse. It was very difficult to notice that.
Yeah, it's most evident on Derpy's left eye, where the pupil gets a little wonky.
Alright, the last major thing that needed to be mentioned is there's a stroke missing on the, I don't know, her left hoof, and it's kind of looks like just did the bottom of it, forgot to do the top. Really easy fix, just kind of missed it.
Yeah. So I think the last thing we're going to say here, or last time I said final thing, and then we had another. So I'm actually not going to say that because I'll sound stupid. But one more thing, possibly final, who knows, is the back of Derpy's mane. It looks a little weird. Now this isn't Timmy-Fooba's fault, because if you look at the reference from the episode, that's kind of how it looks in the episode too. But when you're tracing a vector from the episode, you don't always necessarily want to do exactly the way it is there, because you have to remember that, you know, the episode is a video, and in a video, things go by pretty quick, so the animators don't spend, 5 hours on every frame making sure everything looks exactly beautiful, because you're only going to see each frame for a tiny fraction of a second. So basically the biggest issue here is that at the very back of the mane, there's this weird little stroke that comes out, and it looks really out of place. And we've been kind of sitting here for a while, before we recorded, trying to figure out what you would do with that to make it look not so weird. And I guess my idea would be to make it, because I think what it's trying to show there is that there's more mane on the other side of the body. And what I would do would be to sort of taper it off so it looks like the stroke is disappearing behind the body. But that's just my suggestion. Anybody else have any other way they might do that?
Yeah, that's probably the way to do it. That would keep the proportions the best. Like, if you didn't want to do it that way, or that'd end up looking weird for whatever reason, you could try extending the mane a little bit to the left, so it just gets covered up by the wing, but that might create it looking too large. You can mess up with the angle on the bottom. You would have to mess with it for a bit, but that's one way you could try doing it.
Yeah, another thing you could do, although it would make it look somewhat different, is there's, a few frames before this, there's sort of a completely different look to the back of Derpy's mane, and you could splice that one in, though that might change how it looks. But I guess the main thing here is that the frame looks weird, and when you have a weird looking frame, you might have to make some adjustments to make it look a little nicer.
Yeah, and even so, like, you're taking something from an episode. Nobody's gonna be like, "Hey, I saw that frame and it looked a little bit different." You're just trying to make something that looks nice that people can use for wallpapers or whatever, like just as a resource. So you want it to look like as nice as you can get it, and it doesn't matter if you change it a bit in some places, as long as it turns out looking better. If there's an animation error, or something wonky like this, like. In the episode, I watched the clip to see if it actually showed up, and it does, but it's only for like 2 frames. It looks like Timmy kind of didn't luck out on that choice, but stuff happens.
Yeah, when we're reviewing vectors in the submission queue, we don't go and check the episode and make sure you've done everything pixel perfect. That's not what matters really.
Alright, so overall, for a Photoshop vector especially, there's a lot of things good with this, like the stroke width all the way around. It came out really good. For only having like 2 spots where it's debatably a little wonky, that's really good, especially for an early vector. The only problems with the vector are kind of just technical errors here and there, and I don't know, everybody runs into them in the beginning, and like Timmy himself really improved since then, and just overall, not a bad vector for an early one, but a few things can be improved upon.
Alright, it's time to move on to the question and answer section.
Well, welcome to the question and answer section. I'm Bolanos. Well, the first question is from Timmy-Fooba, one of the new vector inspectors that we presented in the first episode. How do you maintain the vectors, resubmitting corrected or changed versions, discussing the accuracy with other deviants? Well, I usually submitted them to the VectorClub chat group at Skype, where my friends can give me some light and point out some errors that I will forget to fix. Also, I don't maintain my oldest vectors. I prefer to continue working with new interesting projects. Usually I consider it boring, so I'll leave the oldest vectors in the same form that I submitted them to my gallery, like a evolutional chain. And sir?
Yeah, I have to agree with Anbo there. I usually, if I'm unsure about something or just at all, usually I'll run a preview version by some friends, see what they have to say about it. And if they like it, I'll submit it. And once it's submitted, often what I'll do is I'll submit it to DeviantArt, I'll sit there and look at over, and I'll find some errors, and then I'll fix those, resubmit, find more errors, and resubmit a few more times. So usually I've resubmitted the same deviation like 5 times, and right after submitting it. That may not be the best thing to do, but that's kind of what I do. As for old deviations, I don't really go back on them unless someone points out like a big error. I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I can't just let that slide. And I actually recently went back and remastered my first vector because it was pretty terrible. So I personally do like to go back and change things if I discover errors. Yonoda?
Well, just like Bolanos and Sir, I also post a preview on the Skype chat of the vector inspectors. And I'm usually the one that spams it. So they usually get at least 10 different previews until I'm satisfied with the critique. Yeah, and then I just submit it, knowing that there are no errors for me to correct in the end. And I like that. Concerning older versions, I started revectoring my first vector, and I may or may not revector my older vectors as well. Depends on my mood. And
are you done?
Yes, Mahar?
Yeah, just like they said, I really recognize that I make my own errors and I need other people to check them out, so I show them to all them, and it's just like, do you see anything? Can I improve upon anything? Does anything look a little bit weird? And I get the suggestions, and then I move forward from there. Like, even in some vectors I'm working on right now, I pretty much ask for input every step of the way, make sure it can be as good as I can get it. And even like when I first became a vector inspector, I was not comfortable submitting things just bare bone.
Well, the questions have been doubled, and the next question came from Pangbot and Catnipfairy. I hope to pronounce them right. Well, what experience with vectors did you have before actually making them? And have any of you guys tried vectoring before ponies? And what inspired you to start vectoring ponies? Well, I didn't have any previous experience working with them before. I know that they exist, but I hadn't used them in any other project. All that I know, I learned myself with tutorials and with the support of other experienced vector artists like Darko. I wanted to do something for the community, and the work of the VectorClub inspired me to work with them. There was a lot of great art pieces in its gallery, so I thought that I had to give it a try. So I grabbed the Mandy Dax tutorial, and there I started to vector something. My first vector ever was the Murderwell vector that I have in my gallery until now. It reminds me to continue working and do not do the same mistakes. Well, Yanoda?
Yes, well, I didn't really have that much experience with vectors before. I usually just worked with editing graphs for my job, or making vector maps with a program and editing them. And actually the show and fandom actually brought me to make vectors, and I haven't done art in many years. So I tried it and gave it a shot, and I actually enjoyed vectoring, and I find it quite calming. And that's where I am right now.
Yeah,
Sir?
Somewhat before I discovered MLP, I'd done some work in a CAD, computer automated design program, with the pen tool. So I had some familiarity with that, but I'm not really an artist. I've never have been. I still don't really consider myself an artist. I kind of have high standards where the term artist is concerned, and I guess I haven't met my own high standards in that area yet. Someday I hope to call myself an artist, but I don't feel I've gotten there yet. So I didn't really have experience making art. One day, I guess, I was trying to make a logo for something, because I've done some like image manipulation type things before, and this is a logo that I never completed, but I wanted an angry Big Mac for it, so I figured I could just take a screenshot and sort of recreate it, and that was my first vector, and it came out not too terribly, but I didn't look at anything, I just kind of did it, which is why it had all the errors it did. And after I'd done it, I was on DeviantArt, and I noticed that there was a bunch of people submitting things like this. And so I was like, oh, I'll just upload this to my DeviantArt account. And then I kind of made another one for an icon I wanted. And then I made another one, and another one, and another one. And that's kind of got addicted.
Alright, I guess I'll go now, but when I first started, I was kind of thinking about not really just vectoring to vector. I kind of had a goal when I started, like all I did at first was like image manipulation, kind of like Sir did. Like I made a banner for Equestria Daily, and that got on, and I was like, sweet, I can take something that somebody else made and make it into something else, but I didn't want to stop there. So like my whole goal of vectoring at first was to like be able to make something just from nothing, and I'm still not there yet, but that's like my final goal. And I feel like I can accomplish that from vectoring from scratch, but I'm not there yet. But I also wanted to say my first experiences with vectors was kind of poor because I was using GIMP. Please don't use GIMP out there if you're still using it, because it's very limited. Like for the eyes, I didn't have a tool for them, and I had to use the select tool, fill it, and then blur it, and it looks so dumb. I'm sure there's better ways, but
I would like to point out that GIMP is not capable of creating vector graphics. So not only is it limited, it's wrong.
yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, my first vectors weren't vectors at all, but I kind of knew what I was doing when I actually started. So it's still good practice, but yeah, you just don't use GIMP.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for listening. As I mentioned before, we are running out of vectors to... Well, actually, now we've ran out of vectors to critique. So if you have anything you want us to look at, put a link to it in the episode journal, and we will take a look. And also, if you have any questions you want us to answer, you can put those in the episode journal. If you have any suggestions, comments, anything you want to say, you want to tell us how handsome we sound, that's perfectly fine. So yeah, see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
So should we stop the recording now?